Good morning. It's 9 o'clock. It's implementation time. We're now live streaming. Thank you. Welcome to the Implementation Committee agenda. We'll go through it. So, apologies. I've had no apologies received prior to publication. Is there any apologies? Oh, Councillor Laws? Can we put a late apology in for Councillor Laws?
There isn't one.
We haven't had anything?
It just isn't here.
Okay. Tentatively?
I'll move that we accept his late apology.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. Are we a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Forbes. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thanks, carried. Public forum. I'm not aware we've got any public forum to address our implementation committee. Conflict of interest. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arises between their role as an elected representative and any private or external interest they might have. No conflict of interest. Confirmation of the minutes. The minutes of the 14th of October 2020 Implementation Committee. Are there any changes to this before we move it, please? No? We're all in favour? Okay. We have a mover. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Seconder, Councillor Hobbs. Thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you, carried. Outstanding actions from resulting. There are no outstanding actions for the Implementation Committee. Matters for consideration. I don't know that we have any of those either. That's the main part, right. Okay, so we'll move on. 7.1, Infrastructure Strategy for the LTP 2021-2031. This is a very, very good report. This is to seek committee approval for the draft 2021 to 2050 flood protection, land drainage and river assets infrastructure strategy, which will form part of the draft 2021-31 long-term plan. So the purpose of the strategy is there are two parts to this. Identify any significant issues the council is likely to face during the 30-year period and identify the principal options for managing decisions around those issues, along with the time at which key decisions are made. 55 pages in this report is outstanding. It's detailed through. It sets out the Otago Regional Council's infrastructure overview, infrastructure management approach, significant issues and directions, and infrastructure as well. Totaling to, yes? Excuse me.
Councillor Watts has arrived.
Oh.
And there was a discussion about adjourning the meeting.
Okay. All right. Happy to move that?
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, Councillor. Yes. And we'll come back.
Aye.
Right. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Sorry.
There's a small.
It's all right. good to go? This is a very, as I said before, a brilliant report. It lays out everything that we need to know. I'm going to open this by introducing, we've got Pam Wilson here, we've got Ms. Mifflin, Michelle Mifflin, and we've got Dr. Palmer, the engineers. Thank you also too for enlightening us and educating us. There are so many good maps. I appreciate the flood protection, land drainage and river assets that you've actually explained what they are on page 12, and then you also enlighten us on 13 how the strategy moves up. Right from the bottom, operation plans, asset management, infrastructure strategy, which then feeds infrastructure engineering inputs into the long-term plan. That is very much appreciated when we're trying to understand this paper. Would you like to talk to it, our engineering staff, please?
Thank you, Chair, Councillor Carmen Hope. We are pleased as an engineering team to bring this infrastructure strategy to Council for consideration. I guess I will take it as read. I've had some feedback that it has indeed been read. I just wanted to make a brief statement around the strategy scope and why the strategy has the structure it has. The infrastructure strategy covers flood protection, land drainage and river assets only. This is required under the Local Government Amendment Act. The strategy is to outline the key issues, implications and the most likely scenarios for how Council intends to manage its flood protection, land drainage and river management infrastructure over the next 30 years. This is a strategy. While it has a static element, it is a dynamic document, and we've ensured that we've weaved that 3-year review cycle to line up with our long-term plan. Our forecast expenditure, which will be in the long-term planning in detail with similar tables that we're familiar with the last long-term plan, will underpin this. For engineering and indeed operations, we have taken a mature approach with our strategy, with the information that we've now got in our known assets and the state of our assets, and also weaving in our future landscape, which does involve climate resilience and also community engagement in the decision and consultation processes. I do want to reiterate before I open the floor for questions that this is a draft and we are seeking approval to make minor amendments if need be to include it in the consultation document. The community will have a view on this and we value that view. It will help guide any changes or strengthen the position of our strategy. So,
thank you, Ms. Mifflin. Dr. Palmer or Pam, would you have any further comments you'd like to make about the strategy, please?
No, Madam Chair, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Certainly. Firstly, we have Councillor Wilson, followed by Councillor Scott, then Councillor Calvert.
I have shared most of my questions previously, but I'll start with the population. When I looked at the stats link, which I think is footnote 2, it says 236,000, I think, for the population of 2019, and the comment is 240-something thousand. I'm just checking that incorrect figure doesn't put everything else out, or does it? And the assumptions in there.
The difference in the numbers is just basically down to the census data.
Could you turn the mic on, please? Sorry, Pam, to interrupt you. We've got a funny mic.
Do it one more time.
Give it another hit, Pam. There we are, wonderful. Well done.
Okay, so the mismatch in the numbers is actually just down to the use of the census data and when the projections were undertaken. So there's definitely no flow through, and we're amending.
Oh, that will be amended.
That will be absolutely amended.
Great.
Yeah.
Sorry,
it's just clarification, really.
Yeah,
so,
no, that's fine. I hadn't hit it. I wasn't sure where it was going. I do have a number of points, but I'll try and keep it to.
It's fine.
The statute, and it's fantastic. So any critiquing, I don't take it as criticism. The statutory requirements, and this is just a timing. We're in it. I think under statutory requirements, I totally get that we reference to the Local Government Act, but we have a Treaty of Waitangi requirement, which is statutory, to also reference iwi, and we don't. It's not until 4.2 that's done, and I think that what's in 4.2 should actually be under statutory requirements or front-ended somewhere. to give mana whenua some cognition in there. I reference Ian Bryant's submission at annual plan, where he was quite clear that things would have been differently done in the past had we had some involvement around the flood works, I think, on the Tairi. So if that's possible, that's one of the changes that I'd like to see. I think it is just as
Sure.
it could be done as easily as a cut and paste, I think.
Okay.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, we'll strengthen those provisions and reorder that.
Then there's only the other one is statutory scope and statutory scope, and I get exactly what Ms. Miffin's just told us, but there are a whole lot of community assets also in the rivers, and they may be pontoons, or they may be TA bridges, or they may be a whole lot of other things, and they're in the triangle. There isn't any talking to or provision that they are also important to the community, and there seems to be that community layer that's missing. And I know that I've expressed an opinion in the past that community liaison groups would be great because you'd pick up all of those things and their concerns, and I'll leave that to another day. But I'm just wondering whether community assets and protection thereof should be somewhere in their reference. I don't necessarily know the answer,
Yes.
but they are really important to a community. And I know they're not a statutory requirement of you.
Or like a culvert that.
Yeah, well, culverts as well.
TA.
Yeah, indeed.
Through Madam Chair. The infrastructure strategy focuses on ORC assets. I understand what you're saying, and perhaps it's strengthening a piece that we do work with our territorial authorities and communities around that. But I guess the drive for this infrastructure strategy was how we manage our own. There is an interfacing there that we probably should be reticent of. I do want to touch on when you're talking about the community groups, we're working with there is a new significance and engagement, Murray, participation policy, which will create those different tiers of key stakeholder relationships. So the relationships that we have with communities kind of fall into that operational perspective, and we have touched on this through the infrastructure strategy, but we can certainly strengthen it as a piece about communications perhaps, and linking it back to our overarching policies that are being done by other functions.
And lastly, page 21, I think one of the second bullet point at the bottom of the page is a very scant passing reference to a huge asset that we manage, and that's trees and plantings. And the question there is, and I don't know that you've got time to do this as a draft, but can that be strengthened? I mean, we put, and the community puts in a substantial amount of money and resources into plantings, and they are crucial to river management, but they're also a crucial asset. And I think it needs a chapter of its own, but it also needs a chapter that looks in the long term about how that's done, how it may be changed, how it may talk to biodiversity. Gosh, we could get rid of silos here, and actually do be quite constructive to what's happening in the catchment groups and everything else.
Through Madam Chair, on the trees, yes, that is a good pickup. It is a reference. It is something over the next 2 years that we'll be undertaking a significant mapping exercise of our tree defences. Trees are actually considered an asset, particularly under NEMA, and whilst we plant and we maintain and we also remove, we haven't had a robust mapping of them and identifying them. So part of the infrastructure team with river management will be mapping all of our tree assets and having, that there'll be another dot on that table, hopefully in 3 years' time, that says, how many trees and length we've got. But we can actually highlight that is a piece of work that this strategy will be undertaking.
Yeah, I certainly, personally, and maybe it's an issue for debate, I think it's an area that we don't necessarily need to change now, but it would be really good to highlight that we are going to build into the next strategy and concentrate on it, because I think it's one that the community really want to engage with.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Is that you?
It is me, sorry, Don.
That's fine.
There are some others, but
That's all right. We've got Councillor Scott. Please.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just want to reaffirm one of the key points that came out of the strategy for me was that the focus is on maintaining the current assets and how we continue to achieve the current levels of service, and that there's no new infrastructure as planned in the short term. And yeah, so that was actually quite important for me, and particularly in relation to page 45 of the strategy. On page 45, it talks about scheme performance issues, and it talks about the Clutha Delta, the Dart Reefs, the Roxburgh, the Lindsay Creek, completing the Water Leak, some work on the Torrey Plains, and some work around the Lower Waitaki. So maybe my question quite simply is, you know, bearing in mind that the focus, that there's no new infrastructure is planned, or even, for example, the Outram situation that happened recently. So, like, through you, Madam Chairman, so the question is, how does the strategy handle these issues that evolve or expectations of our community over time?
Palmer or Ms Mifflin or Ms Wilson?
Page 26 of the report.
Yeah, 26 or 50. 26 to 55 it is, yes. Thank you, Chair Hobbs. Councillor Hobbs.
So, through Madam Chair, thank you, Councillor Scott. The strategy, with regards to new infrastructure, the long-term plan and the strategy identifies that we have to understand our scheme performance, which is a critical piece of work over the next few years, which will then, I guess, provide the definition around what new infrastructure or levels of service changes will be needed. We have indicated in the long-term plan as a result of the scheme performance reviews that there may be a requirement for infrastructural changes years 10 out, noting that is an indication, quite high-level estimates, that we may have to make some changes to critical infrastructure. At this point, the strategy can't provide those detailed scoping or what that landscape may look like. This strategy really is underpinned by important scheme performance review, climate change work done by natural hazards over the next 2 to 3 years, and these will be the decisions that will be coming back around that. So in terms of new infrastructure.
So in terms of any new infrastructure, if it was ever required,
yeah.
It's not completely rolled out, but it's something that's not allowed for in the plan, a process for identifying this in the plan, but it would have to come up independently.
Yes, through Madam Chair, what we're really saying is we don't see in the period of the strategy council getting into very large new schemes like Taieri or Clutha.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I just note paragraph 27 of the covering report that infrastructure is just one of the methods we deal with the fundamental issue, which is flood risk management, and highlighting that other methods may be the preferred way of dealing with the fundamental issue of flood risk management, like provisions of the RPS, public information through the hazard database, land use controls and adaptation. So infrastructure is just one method and can't be seen in isolation from those other methods that might be more appropriate with some infrastructure for dealing with the root reason why we do this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. We have Councillor Calvert, followed by Councillor Deaker.
I'm not sure where these sort of things belong, whether in here or in some financial area, but I would like to see, since one of the things we're doing is continuing to engage with central government, hoping that they might make a contribution to some of this, alongside that, I would like to see when it says like there's 4,000 hectares affected by the Leith flood protection scheme or whatever, I'd like to see, whenever those figures are there, the amount of hectares that is government or non-rateable land, because if we're making a case to Wellington, we should always be making people aware that we're protecting, the ratepayers of Dunedin are protecting assets that belong to the government. So I would like to see the amount of, every time we have a piece of land, sort of in brackets, the amount that is actually government land or non-rateable, or however you want to put it. So I think that would be useful just to keep that on the radar, because it's a different thing than them supporting community protection. It may be that we want to consider too whether commercial, and including farmland in this case, is any different than residential, in the sense that there are some people who are making a living from their land, and therefore it makes sense for them to be paying rates to protect it in a way that protecting residential land is a different thing a wee bit. So I'd just like to encourage you to think about whether that's worth doing too. And the third thing is, I would like to see things separated out a wee bit between, and I suppose it probably relates to the Leith flood protection scheme and not the others, the difference between amenity and flood protection. And what got me going on that, of course, was that here we have a group advising us on what amenity they want around the Leith, none of whom are paying for any of it. And that doesn't seem to me to be right. I would have been more than happy if we were being advised about some of those things by iwi, for example, but I'm not to be advised by people who don't have any skin in the game, seemed. Anyway, so I'd like to see the amenity separated out a wee bit, because it's called flood protection, and perhaps that's not totally an accurate description of some of the things we were doing around the university.
Palmer, do you have a response to that? Excuse me.
We'll strengthen those parts of
Thank you.
of the strategy, but just note that it is true, it is wider than flood protection, because people now expect other issues like public access to assets, I see the biodiversity value. So there is a broader value and benefit, and therefore expenditure and scope of works than we might have had, say, 30 years ago, where it was very much focused around flood protection in an engineering style.
We can separate them out.
But we can separate them out.
Walking tracks along the top of the flood bank or whatever.
Yes, that's what I was thinking too.
Yep, we'll make that separation.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. Is that you finished? Thank you, Councillor Deaker.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. It's a wee bit similar to what Councillor Calvert's just been talking about, because it's the same area. The Tertiary Precinct Planning Group, which I've been a member of for quite a long time, representing this council, has taken a great deal of interest in the lower Leith, that is from 4th Street down past the stadium to the harbour, which an area which is almost totally free of amenity values, as those of us who live in the city will know. It's ugly, it's derelict, I'm sure it's quite effective in terms of flood protection, all those great big concrete banks. But it doesn't do the things that Dr. Palmer's just been talking about in terms of providing amenity and access and a little bit of beauty. The university and the Polytechnic have both been involved with us for some time over particularly the last 5 years, when we've done quite a lot of public consultation on what we could do down there.
Yes.
And we've come up with some, as most of us around this table will know, some pretty useful plans on how to make that an attractive part of Dunedin. And keeping in mind, contrary to what Councillor Calvert just said, the university did contribute to the work through their landscape. They had skin in that game. Anyway, there is an expectation of the Polytechnic and the university that we're going to be doing something down there. Now, when I read this infrastructure plan, I note that on page 26, 50 and 54, there are references, in some cases multi-million-dollar references, to work which we're planning to do on that stretch of the Leith. But I understand, like, this is the point of my question, that expenditure is simply to fix, reinforce, improve the effectiveness of what we've got there already. It is not for any amenity work. Now, if that's true, we need to front up to the University and the Polytechnic and say,
Yes.
we're not about to improve the amenity value of that disastrous part of Dunedin in your campuses. What we're doing is maintaining our assets. There's a level of expectation they have which is not being met by this plan. And I think we need to be absolutely upfront and clear about that. Even though we've consulted widely, we've come up with not extravagant, but attractive plans. We're not going to be doing them. Now, have I got that right? And if it isn't right, we need to be absolutely explicit to the landholders down there that that's what it's all about. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Deaker.
Through Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Deaker. Indeed, I did meet with Otago Polytech yesterday and University of Otago to have those upfront discussions on where we were at and to set expectations and a realistic approach for the lower amenity. We have an amount for the short term, which has certainly stemmed from the work from 2018 to look at amenitization approach in parts of the lower Leith near the Polytech. My discussion with them was to indicate that there has been, I guess, concepts and a misalignment and some expectations on what the next long-term solutions are. I think through the strategy, we are indicating that we do indeed have to do work on the historic wall channels. From a pragmatic engineering approach of form and function, what I would like to do is, in the short term, establish some amenitization of a section of the Leith, which we do have concepts around, some design, and then have a prioritisation of the long-term plan. The long-term plan has to take into account, if we are doing work to structurally improve the channel flow and the function of the Leith, it needs to tie in with any amenitization and greater plans. And to me, I think those stages need to be realistic, and also the public needs to be able to consult on that without losing, I do remember, an industrialisation, the brutality architecture that this part of the Leith offers. I'm wanting to just draw a line in the sand on this and refresh the terms of reference and incorporate the challenges we've got with the historic wall structurally and look at a longer term plan with it. So that's why it remains in there, but I guess we need to sort of have an approach that's achievable with all parties to achieve form and function. Those discussions have been had, though. There are no surprises. I believe they will be consulting on the LTP in regards to the long-term plan as well.
Can I thank Michelle for that and thank her for the word amenitization, which certainly. I hope we'll never have to use.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Deaker. Councillor Hobbs?
Oh, he's just following through from that. I wanted to find a definition of amenitization. I thought this is what I took from what you were saying, that it is answering Councillor Deaker's point about making it more attractive, access to the river safely, those sorts of issues. The other thing I wanted to check about was cost. Have you got that far? And are the reasons for delay on this or taking it out not only trying to line up University Polytech and ORC, or is it about this is costs and we're just delaying it a little? Thank you.
Through Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hobbs. Amenitization is my bland engineering attempt to approach form and function in an architectural way. I think we face some challenges, engineering and structural wise, and we're very mindful of the community, the greater community approach to being able to access and enjoy these structures. So what I would like to see is that we do have a lower Leith to the harbour long-term plan that actually sets out what that staging might look like. We're not in that position now. We have, however, done the survey, the hydrology studies to incorporate sea level rise. So we've got some fantastic foundations to work off. But I think that detail to provide some robust indications are not quite there.
Thank you for that, Ms Mifflin. We've got Councillor Kelleher and then Councillor Malcolm to follow, please.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, good report. Thank you. Two or three quick questions. On page 22, there's a table showing the inspections of the flood banks, and we're showing that 85% are considered to be very good through to average, and then 15% are in the poor to very poor. The capital spend, and obviously the first, say, 3 to 5 years is the most accurate that we're able to predict forward. The capital expenditure, is that aligned towards rectifying the poor and very poor situations that we sit in under those inspections?
Through Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Kelleher. Yes, it is. Those ratings are based on our condition assessment reports and known areas that we have to improve and make resilient. So yes, the capital spend does provide for that.
Okay, thank you. Second question was just around, we're highlighting there on that same page that stock damage is considered to be the most common factor affecting the condition of flood banks. And I understand that stocking on the flood banks is a necessary maintenance tool. So while we're highlighting that, is there a plan for a strategy to maybe ensure that that ongoing damage isn't going to continue to occur?
Through Madam Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor Kelleher, for this question. It's a key question because we're actually reviewing our bylaw also. It expires next year, and we will be taking the bylaw to make a fit-for-purpose document which allows for this, and also looking at our leasing agreements, particularly with the floods of December 2019 and February 2020. Southland and Otago have both recognised that some of the stock, including heavy beast, not just sheep, are contributors to excavating the weaknesses in our stock banks. So we have a few mechanisms in which we can control that, but definitely we'll be taking that into account through the bylaw as one mechanism, and also looking at our current leasing and best practices on our banks.
Okay, thank you. And the third question was just around the forward planning of the expenditure and the community under the flood banks or are living in those areas. With consultation with them, this won't be a surprise to them. They'll be, do you think, pleased with how this is proposed and planned and sort of in line with what their expectations would be, or is this likely to be a surprise?
Through Madam Chair, when you say is it likely to be a surprise, which element of?
Just around the proposed expenditure and the unknowns around who is going to fund that. Yeah. And then also they are the closest to the infrastructure. They see it every day. And we get varying levels of complaints versus maybe accolades for how it's managed. Are the community going to be happy with our forward planning, do you think? Or is this something that has been derived solely within house and it's now yet to be consulted with the community?
Okay, thank you. We've designed this infrastructure strategy from several sources. One is most definitely the recent flood events and the consultations we've had through communities and understanding the effect and on our infrastructure that has had. In terms of the forward planning, I would hope the community has a pragmatic understanding of the approach we're taking. We're being quite open and transparent about the journey we're on for the next 3 years, and indicating certainly in years 10, 20 and 30 where we're expecting there will be some infrastructural changes that we may need to consider. We have taken previous consultation on the annual plan and ensured that we've included that in here in terms of how we're approaching our infrastructure strategy and managing it. Whether the community is happy or unhappy, I'm hoping though will actually lead us on that in terms of providing consultation advice on where they think some of the issues are aligned with them. But we have certainly looked across our schemes, and certainly in the feedback in the last 20 months I've been here, it's tried to reflect that. It is a draft, and that's hopefully will garner the right responses that we need to define. Sorry.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher. Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, look, thanks for the report, and look, it's very good to understand your rationale behind your decisions that you're trying to make. So, look, it is, I thought it set it out very well for me. But there was just a wee question on the report, page 12, our page 31, the setting the context. Under our RPS, we call the coastal zone 12 kilometres, whereas you've got it at 22.2 kilometres. The marine area extends 22.2 kilometres out to sea, just in that first paragraph. Whereas under our RPS, we're saying it's 12 kilometres and to the ridgeline, our coastal. 12 miles, is it? 12 kilometres? We've been talking in the RPS.
12 miles.
We'll have a look at that.
I think
Thank you, Dr.
the difference, if I could help, is that it's 12 nautical miles.
Oh,
Nautical.
And you've used kilometres. So I suspect they're the same.
They're probably the same. Got his goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Apologies for a question that I haven't referenced before, and I blame people talking about amenity and stop banks that have brought it to my mind. One of the issues that came up during the year, Lindsay Day presented on behalf of the Trails group about access over stop banks. Is this an area that we can expect submissions or should be referencing in here, or is that a matter of the bylaw instead?
Mr. Palmer.
Through you, Madam Chair, we foreshadow that as a direction around enabling access. We've got the table, the summary table in the strategy, and we actually expressly talk about access. And the second thing is we've got a workshop in preparation that we'll be running with you next month to take this a little bit further.
Thank you. We look forward to that.
That detail in my reading. Apologies.
That's all right. Councillor Hobbs, you had a question again.
Yeah, thank you. Under your significant issues, you go through them all. First, I want to say I agree with them all. The one that I want to question about is in significant issue number 4, legislation and regulatory, and that's page 35 of 55.
Thank you.
You talk about there are a wide range of management options available for environmental enhancement. These include riparian planting, fish passage, and giving rivers and the ocean more room to behave naturally. The Clutha is the most unnatural river I've ever seen. My mother told me it used to be a wild river.
Still is.
But you're not talking about undamming. What are you talking about there, getting rivers to behave naturally?
Through you, Madam Chair, what we're talking about is providing a corridor, I suppose, which recognises that rivers are dynamic sediment transport systems, and they move about, they meander, and there has been a practice of constraining the behaviour in such a way it doesn't behave as a natural system anymore, and then creates a dependency to keep it in that position. And we've got numerous examples in Otago and across New Zealand actually of the significant cost involved in that. And there's a strong move to creating room for the river, which means, physical relocation of flood banks away to create setbacks and tolerating some of that, restoring riparian buffers. So, that's what we are referring to. It's a very difficult area, though, of course. You're talking about freehold land and dependencies. And
Do we own all those bits that we want to have?
No, we don't. So, and these are sort of aspirational things, and they're extremely challenging, but we do have some opportunities. When we think about the lower Clutha Delta and the shoreline retreat issue, it starts to invite thinking around, okay, where's the proper location for our coastal flood bank? What should happen to the land between the scheme and this new coast, to see those sorts of things. So there's kind of an opportunity opening up there to deliver on this. But it's a really complex issue.
Excellent news. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Mifflin?
Thank you. Just to add to what Dr. Palmer has said, an example of soft engineering and that room for river approach is on one of the Lower Clutha flood repairs, where we did take away doing rock revetment and piling and using a tiered stage and using alders and a different planting system. So I think for us, the flood repair program gave us an opportunity to actually look at different ways of stabilising and providing resilience, but using an environmental approach with it.
That's fabulous news.
We actually took you to that site on
Thank you for that. Is there any other speakers that wish to be heard? I have four questions, if I may. Firstly, you've got on page 12, we've got that great figure 4, flood protection, land drainage and river assets. In the river assets, you've got ruck buttresses, groins and flood banks. I know they're river assets, but how does that work? Like, do they depreciate being an asset, or is it not that sort of asset? Would you mind just explaining a wee bit further, please?
Probably Mr. Donnelly's the right person to talk about which assets we depreciate and the like, but my recollection is flood banks are not depreciated, but we do depreciate civil structures like pump stations and parts of pump stations. They have different depreciation periods. Control systems are different to the concrete structure itself, so that's all set out in long-term plan.
Thank you. That's my first one. My second question is number 27, figure 6. You've got the significant issues associated with each other, and of course the scheme performance is in the middle. And you very cleverly talk about that further right throughout the report for each one, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure all my fellow councillors do as well. My question to you is about your Otago Civil Defence Emergency Management Group that you liaise with. Obviously, it's stronger when you have flooding and heavy, when all that needs to come into play. But what happens on a daily or a monthly? Do you meet with them monthly just as check-ins, if you like?
Yes, there's a very close relationship between Emergency Management Otago and the 6 councils that make it up, of which ORC is one.
Yes.
As it happens, from an administrating authority point of view, it's in the Operations Directorate alongside Natural Hazards and Engineering team. What that means is that there's a very strong interaction between the ORC, part of the wider group function, and the ORC business as usual, infrastructure, regional policy statement, district planning, hazard database, adaptation planning. And so, yes, there's a very close relationship there to make sure that all fits. And including from a readiness reduction point of view,
yes,
and then also in a response and recovery point of view. And Ms. Mifflin referred to NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, and so again we're involved in getting part funding of repairs and the like. So yes, the answer is a very close relationship.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. I've got 2 more. On page 18 of 55 of our very good report, we've got the infrastructure overview. Now, you've got a good map here, figure 8, location of Otago flood schemes, and you've got a Stony Creek flood protection scheme. Now, I see that's between Queenstown and Wanaka, but can you just tell us a wee bit more about that, please? Because it's sort of not mentioned in the other 6. It sort of comes up there, and I just would like to know a wee bit more, if I may, please.
In the early 2000s, there were 2 closely spaced debris flow events. Stony Creek is one of several thousand alluvial fans in Otago. On the lower part of the fan is the Meadowstone subdivision and other occupiers. There was the 2 events I talked about. In the mid-2000s, ORC worked very closely with QLDC and others to come up with some mitigation works because it highlighted there was an unacceptably high risk. There was extensive discussion by this council about how much to do in terms of a scheme of engineering interventions. In the end, it landed with a set of a very small set of limited interventions that kind of manage the existing river system or river the best way it could. There's no actual extensive assets there. You won't see flood banks, that kind of thing. And so we've called it a scheme,
right?
Because we do maintain it as a system. I'm happy to provide more detail.
That's you answered that well, thank you, Dr. Palmer. My last one is on page it would be 82 and 83, which talks about the Whero Small Block Owner Pilot Project.
It's next paper, isn't it?
Oh, is it? Oh, my apologies. Is it?
Yeah.
I do apologise. I will withdraw that. Now we have some recommendations. Hello, Councillor Scott. My apologies.
Recommendations.
Seconded.
Thank you. And I have a seconder of Councillor Deaker. Give me here. I'll just go back for a minute. Okay, so we have got 1, that the council receive this report. 2, approves the draft 2020 infrastructure. And number 3, which is the noting that the infrastructure strategy to provide the framework direction. Before we move that, Mrs. Gardner, have you got anything you wish to say? No, nothing to add? Okay. Councillor Calvert.
From a sort of technical point of view, I thought it sounded like the proposal was to do some little amendments and things. So
yes, you want to?
The resolution should choose something that.
Sure.
And I'm
yes, you're thinking.
It actually says it in recommendation 2. It says subject to any minor editorial.
Right, okay, so that's.
Are you happy with? So we've got subject to any minor editorial changes made by staff. Councillor Calvert, you happy with that?
Yes, it was just because as you read it out, it didn't say that.
Sorry, I apologise. Yes. And also, Councillor Wilson, does that tie in with what you've been talking about too? And you as well, Councillor Callagher? Okay. So if you're happy, we've got 3. Or are we happy to move those all 3 together? Yep. Is that all right? Yep. Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried.
Can we just say what a good report that, because we didn't actually talk to it
yes.
at all.
Yes.
So can I think we
absolutely
agree that that was a really great
I think report.
It made you feel like you're in the hands of grown-ups who were actually having a proper look at this.
Councillor Calvert, I think on behalf of the council, I would just like to say thank you to our engineering team. It was brilliantly put together. It was easy to read. It was easy to understand. I think the discussion we've had here this morning has reflected that. May you keep up the good work. And I also know there's other staff that are here and involved in this report that don't always sit up the front. So I think from all of us, I take your endorsement there, Councillor Calvert, and please thank everybody. That concludes. Oh, Miss Melfin, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to conclude. Thank you for the feedback, the positive, constructive feedback. But I do actually want to extend my thanks to our council and Gavin and the engineering team that has underpinned this, that we've worked hard for the last 12 months to build, and we have the right people in the right role. And I'm excited for where we're going with this and really appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, Ms. Mifflin, and I think we're excited too. We've got 2 refreshingly fabulous women down there. Dr. Palmer, you have a great team, and they're just lovely and down to earth, and we appreciate that. That is the conclusion of 7.1. Councillor Scott, would you like to come and share 7.2, please? Thank you. Thank you for using your
And ladies. Okay, welcome everybody to the environmental implementation update. Welcome to Andrea and to Gavin. This update is in the areas of freshwater biosecurity and biodiversity. It focuses on a number of activities. For example, the biosecurity and rural liaison. It focuses on improved water quality. It names Lake Hayes, South Otago Upper Lakes, and it talks about potential future projects, the Tomahawk and Awhero. It talks about funding proposals. It talks about non-regulatory approaches to best practice land management. It talks about wallabies, wilding pines, community-led rabbit projects, biodiversity mapping, and protected covenanted sites. And before I pass it over to Andrew or Gavin to say their comments, I'll just point out the recommendations that we're focusing towards is one, to receive the report, but secondly, to note the range of standard business and transformational activities being undertaken to maintain and improve Otago Regional Council's delivery of environmental implementation activities. And I challenge this committee to maybe, when they ask questions or move into a debate, to think, well, are all these activities transformational? Are some of them or some of them not? Are all these activities strategic? Are some of them or some of them not? Is there more that staff or different things that staff should be doing? Is there more that councillors should be doing in this area of implementation? It's an important area if we want to make achievements in terms of outcomes. So there it is. But before I move into questions, Gavin and Andrea, any comments in relation to this pretty detailed report? Right. Okay. Kate.
Thank you. I just want, I think it shows some transformational stuff, thank you. And I don't know that we could be expecting you to be delivering too much more right at the moment. So thank you. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one's on paragraph 30. And I'm just intrigued, given the success of what I understand is the Upper Lakes Good Water Project, why that project is going to be fully transferred to ORC management at the end of the financial year. And I've got no problems with that happening, except for I know the wealth of community, the benefit of having community doing these things and how that strengthens the community. So I just want to understand why that is happening.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, through the chair. Really, from a cost-effective perspective, but we would very much consider the local expertise as we move to that model. So it's we've got an external person helping us while we don't have any staff in the immediate area to help. But obviously we're looking to collaborate with local knowledge and expertise as much as possible. So I guess that's up for discussion when the time comes as the best model to progress that project.
That's great. And I just want to say that I think building capacity in a community and a community group to do that stuff and succession planning is always preferred and more efficient long term than, and it's in that context. I hope it's not being taken as a negative. The other one is I just wanted to talk about the Awhero, and I appreciate.
No, you're welcome.
Well, there's two parts to that, and I have to acknowledge Councillor Robinson, I think, did some work on this many years ago on the Awhero, and the risk of dealing with this as just a small issue, an issue in a discrete part of the Awhero. My understanding of the Awhero is there's issues of drainage for the rural area, for the urban areas. There are definitely issues of contamination in the urban areas, and yet we're focusing on the small block owners, and why we're almost putting it appears that we're putting the blame on them, but not necessarily. Is it for the total quality? So can I just understand why we're not doing the whole of the Awhero, which is often
through the chair, Kate, Andrea.
Yep, through the chair. So I just sorry to clarify back to the Good Water Project in Wanaka. It's really the management. So completely we want autonomy and ownership to sit with the community, but it's really ORC's contribution in terms of overall project management is where we would see that better sitting in ORC. So definitely I may have not answered that question as well as I could have the first time. In terms of Awhero, I guess more active facilitation of on-the-ground projects is new for my team. So we have to start where we think we can manage it and grow and develop our own internal confidence with being able to deliver that. Obviously, if you look across the region, there are multiple areas in which we could add value. So we chose this particular part of the catchment not to single out anybody, but it's an area in which I guess is able to be discreetly managed and with a type of landowner that we haven't actively worked with in the past. So it's as much as doing something that's achievable and also building up our capability to work with a range of people. So definitely open to feedback about anything else that we might wish to incorporate into that project.
And one further question, if I may, through the chair, just understanding, in another life, I've heard many of...
Kate, are you satisfied with that answer?
Yes, I am, but it's on the same issue.
Yeah.
So in another life, the understanding how the Awhero operates has caused people in the urban areas consternation because they feel like the water doesn't drain away quickly enough. And I've read reports on it. I don't want to go into that, but just some assurance that keen people doing riparian planting further down, that will be controlled so as not to reduce the capacity for the water to be cleared. I don't want to exacerbate in what others suggest is already an issue.
Through the chair, yes, we definitely don't want to exacerbate any issues in this. So we will make sure that we're fully aware of the range of science and contextual issues, and it might obviously be useful to touch base with Councillor Robertson just to get that historical information as well. So
sounds great. Sounds an exciting project. I've got Hilary and Alexa, but before I go to them, are there any other comments or questions on the Awhero or the Wanaka, so we can just focus our conversation and ideally add to it?
No, I haven't.
You don't have
I'd
any?
like having one.
Alexa's on the Awhero or the Wanaka?
Oh, Wanaka.
Yeah.
Should I fire ahead? I was just wondering why Wanaka fits into the Good Water, the Upper Lakes Good Water project. Can you just tell me about that? I've got some other questions on that later. But.
Through the chair, so my understanding is there are two catchment groups, the Upper Lakes and Waiwanaka. They have regular interactions with each other, but they both have their set of landowners that they work with. There is some minor crossover, I believe, in terms of landholders, but they work collaboratively with each other and just slightly different geographic boundaries in terms of the catchment.
So could they be, is there a reason they're not referred to here, Waiwanaka, or is it just not relevant?
Through the chair, in this particular project, it's one I've inherited, so I'm not an expert on it, but I think it was focused more on just the upper catchment group.
I see, so that because the Wanaka catchment group is really the very upper, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's more upper than the Waiwanaka.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Good. I'm just...
Maybe you can clarify.
Sarah?
Just contextually, I might be wrong, but I think that Upper Lakes were the recipients of the Freshwater Improvement Fund money earlier. So they've been going on that for about 3 years, as opposed to Waiwanaka, who are more recently formed from the former Upper Lakes Trust, and the freshwater money has come more recently.
Just lastly, Ryan, I wonder if we do have, or if it could be made available, a map of all the catchment groups at some point?
Yes. That's good. What a wonderful question.
I think actually we have on our water page on our website, if you go to that, the FMUs are there, and then the catchment groups inside of those FMUs are listed. So I'm not sure if they're mapped, but it would be a good place to start.
Thanks.
Is that where it is, Andrea?
Through the chair, yes, and I can also, in a previous paper, I've written about the catchment groups. We had a map in that, so I'm happy to circulate that.
Great.
Thanks.
Sounds great. So we're just focusing on Wanaka and Awhero. Any other questions or comments? If not, moving to, I've got Hilary and then Michael and Marion.
I've still got my other question as well.
My questions are, I don't know whether they're all on one pile, but they're surrounding compliance, plant pests and rabbits. The first question is, could we put out in a way, I don't know whether it's sort of a press releasey type thing or whether we should just publish it or whether we should send things to the people involved, but what we've found out from here, like what I see in the way of rabbits is East Ida Valley, 85% compliance, and
What page are you on, Hilary, please?
I'm on page 94 in here. What's it in? Sorry, I've got a hard copy, so it's table 1 and 2 of.
It's page 94 of the agenda.
Right. 94? Yeah.
94.
Yeah. So
great.
We've got 0 for Wanaka compliance and pretty Av for the peninsula and 85% for East Ida Valley. I think we could put some of that stuff out so as that we're saying, hey, some of you haven't got with the program and some of you have, and thanks to the people who have, and because that conversation about rabbits and things we want out there, and we want to say, actually some people are doing a good job and some people just haven't got with the program. I think we should just sort of get some of that stuff out there. Is that a reasonable thing to do? I mean, there's no point just putting a table, because part of what we're doing is educating people, and there's nothing as educative as your neighbour coming along and saying, why haven't you got with the program? So is it possible for us to put some stuff out about?
Any comment, Andrea?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So a couple of things there. One, the table represents a description of the number of the properties that we've inspected. So it's not an overview of the rabbit situation in Otago. It's as much as in terms of the resources that we have. So in my mind...
sorry, Andrea, are you saying that the percentages there relate to the number of inspections?
It's a snapshot of the inspections that we've undertaken and the outcomes of those inspections, as opposed to an overview of the region.
Or the number of rabbits?
Yes. Correct. So
that's night count stuff.
In terms of communicating that, so I would very much like us to be a function that is evidence-based and as a result of the data that we collect that informs our future work program. So what we aim to do in terms of our compliance process, so individual landowners very much know the outcome of the inspection process. But when we pick up patterns in terms of areas that may be less compliant than others, we would go into those communities and have those conversations. We're not quite at that point of having the resources to be able to do that, but very much we need to be data driven and to be responding and working with our communities based on the information that we collect.
Yeah. Just hang on, Michael, please. So is this information online?
Through the chair, this report is publicly available on our website, yes.
Yeah, but like compliant rabbit and from other, maybe more detailed, do we communicate in any way? Do we need to? Does that follow, I think, Hilary's point, doesn't it?
Yeah. It is data. I thought it was data because it was presented to us as if it was real. Is it?
Yeah. Before I go to Michael, we'll go Sarah, and then we'll go. We're just talking about rabbits.
So I think, the point Ms. Howard is making is that Councillor Calvert was asking about a press release that potentially would highlight the areas of Otago that are compliant. And what we're saying is that this is a snapshot of inspections we've done in these areas, not all of Otago. So it would be disingenuous to say that this is reflective of all of Otago because we've only sampled or inspected so many properties. I think if you wanted a compromise, we could talk about the number of properties inspected and the percentage compliant, but not necessarily draw any conclusions about the rest of the properties in those areas.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Now, I've actually got a list of names here. Michael, Marion, Alexa.
I haven't, sorry.
If you haven't finished, carry on.
Yeah,
We're
so
still
that
talking
was,
about rabbits?
and pests.
How about we just focus on rabbits for a moment? Is there anybody that wants to talk about rabbits? Michael, we'll come back to you, Hilary.
This strikes me as meaningless, this table. And I'm really interested to know why the compliance doesn't seem to be based around the number of rabbits. For example, I'm reading this and there's only two inspections of the Alexandra area for rabbits. And I'm pretty sure that rabbits live there. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's one of the worst infected regions of Otago, of New Zealand. And yet we've only done 2 inspections?
Through the chair.
Is that right?
So through the chair, that is correct. Yes, we are working as hard as we can with the resources that we have available. So we have a program in place that prioritises areas of the region so that we can cover those that are most rabbit prone. That doesn't mean that the areas that we're not inspecting do not have rabbits, but with the resources that I have available, we're doing the very best that we can.
I'm struggling on that one because I'm pretty sure the rabbit infestation in central Otago and the lakes is critical to extreme, as distinct from, say, the Otago Peninsula. We've got 2 inspections in Alexandra, 5 in Wanaka, 45 in the Otago Peninsula. And that to me would suggest a mismatch of priorities.
Yes, back to Sarah.
First of all, I think it's incorrect to say that it's not reflective of the number of rabbits because, as I understand it, the inspections are done using the McLean scale. So non-compliant is where you're level 3 or above. So that's how you determine whether you're compliant or non-compliant. So that is a reflection of number of rabbits, first off.
No. This is the number of inspections. There's only been 180. That's what it says.
I know there's not the number of inspections. What I'm saying, though, is you said this data was not reflective of, it was not about the number of rabbits. What I'm saying to you is it is about the number of rabbits because we determine compliance based on the McLean scale, which reflects the number of rabbits, and the levels on the McLean scale reflect the number of rabbits seen. So that's true. The I think the other thing is, just to clarify, in terms of inspections, the total number of inspections undertaken is 180.
Yeah.
Now, remembering that we, up until recently, had, I think you had 1 dedicated staff member for rabbits. And how many do you have now?
Through the chair, 2, although other staff have been assisting with the rabbit program. Some of the properties are very, very large and some are smaller, which reflects in the table as you see more non-compliance in places like the Otago Peninsula because the properties are smaller size versus, for example, the Ida Valley where we have large scale stations, so it takes longer physically to undertake an inspection.
So 180 inspections with mostly 1 person, now more recently 2. There's your issue. You're about to, we have staff who are based in different places. You're about to consider the long-term plan. We have been working to a number and you have asked us to prioritise. If this is an issue for you, then now is the time to think about whether 2 people is sufficient.
To do inspections. Okay.
It's not just the number of people, it's where you are basing those people that would seem to be highlighted by this graph and table.
Okay. Or do we know where they're based, Andrea?
Through the chair, yes, I do know where my staff are based. I'll just point out on paragraph 74, we're hoping to contract out some of the inspections so that we can cover some of the areas that we're not currently covering. We're also, as you'll see on figure 14, we're undertaking a number of community-based initiatives in the next 6 to 12 months that cover those other areas as well. So
Just
we are
as a matter
trying
of
to.
interest, if budget wasn't an issue, what's a reasonable number of inspectors?
I think we, through the chair, we could easily double the number that we have overall in the entire team.
2 to 4 or something.
Yep. So we have 8 permanent staff in the biosecurity team at the moment, and we've proposed 14 in the LTP for next year.
No, thank you. There's some food for thought in terms of the LTP. Any other comments in relation to rabbits? Alexa?
It's a massive problem, and it's an increasing problem around in the Wakatipu Basin. I'm hearing more and more of it daily, and especially in peri-urban areas. But what I'm also hearing around the traps, and I don't know if you are, is that there's many people in Queensland who are willing to actually start wanting to get together and to work with ORC and to really get a plan together. And it relates to some other comments I had with the report, in that, are we able to move fast enough to keep up with the enthusiasm within our communities? And I know that's a wider question, and it's definitely a question for our LTP planning as well. But there are community groups in rabbits, water restoration, all sorts of things like that, who sometimes feel they're having to move on in spite of us rather than with us. And I'm very keen on rabbits and on water in a wider way, that we're moving with our communities and not forcing them to move in spite of us. So in rabbits, I think now is a really good time, because we've got the winter coming up. It's the right moment to start.
So, Andrea, is the conversation, I think, moving into these community-led projects? And in your report, you've identified a number of areas where this is happening. And we're seeing it as an exciting move forward. We had the situation at Clyde and others. Any comments in terms of how that's tracking based on what Alexa said?
Thank you, through the chair. So I guess it's a bit of a cycle, and we are putting more structure around that cycle. So the starting point, I guess, is a call to action from the ORC from a compliance perspective, and we have, while we may not be meeting our own expectations, we are doing the best that we can to stimulate individual landowners and remind them about their roles and responsibilities. So that's part of the equation. If we take, and that's working. So I have a recent example of a group of landowners that have received non-compliant letters from us, their own initiative. They're now working together to come up with a plan. They've invited us along to a meeting. We'll attend that. That's fantastic. So I think we've got very good community will. There seems to be a lack of understanding, or just a bit of a catalyst, a facilitator that is needed to turn that willingness into action, and that's where we're hoping to fill a gap. In terms of can we meet the demand, probably not, and so we're thinking about ways to sort that out. So we have signalled, for example, a dedicated community education facilitation role for next year in the LTP. That's a different skill set in terms of bringing people together, and helping them coordinate and engage with contractors directly than it is to do an inspection on a high country station. So we're working on that. We're very fortunate to have some amazing people in the community that are helping us, giving up their time to show leadership and work collaboratively with us so that we can get some of these things underway.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for your work and your team's work. I want to wrap this rabbits up. Kevin, were you on rabbits?
Yeah, I'm definitely on rabbits. I want to hop right in here. Hey, you had a target of 130 inspections. You actually did 180. So that's got to be commended. So obviously someone's taken the initiative to say we need to push the button on this rabbit problem. I just look at, and I realise Alexandra's only had 2, but an area very close, Ettrick Moa Flat, you've had 48 inspections with a compliance rate of 89.6. So, and I assume that you're just going to move up those areas as you go. But the thing I'd like to know is more around what you've, there's 2 parts. The 57.2, I think I'm just not happy with that figure, with the figure of compliance being expressed that way, because there's a lot of areas that are doing the 84.6%, the 89%, those areas that are doing good jobs get branded with the bunch that aren't doing such good jobs. So it would be good to see, well, this area is good and this is what they're doing there and this is how, so it could be held up as an exemplar. So just on that, but on 75, you talk about the request to act, and which is very good. So you've taken the next step. So down the peninsula, there's 45 properties, 38 are non-compliant. So you've sent them out a request to act. What work are you doing? I suppose under privacy, you can't say that when you send the letter to Andrew, you can't say that Gretchen's properties are just as bad, have a yarn and get things sorted. But actually, we probably need to do that. So what work is actually being done to bring those property owners together to get a broader fix, Andrew?
Yeah. Through the chair. So yes, we very much want to play a role in that. It's a balance of working with the resources that we have to do the inspections versus the next step. I think in many cases, in this particular case that you've referred to, the community has got together themselves. They've talked to their neighbours. So yes, we can't breach confidentiality. We've also been issuing compliance on other publicly funded organisations. So they've been playing a leading role where they might be the landowner, but they've got a tenant, for example, there and facilitating that. So ultimately, I would like us to get to a space where we are working through in a structured way. So, some of the percentages in here are, again, just the properties we've inspected. So it doesn't mean that whole geographic area equals that percentage. It's just the number of properties we've been able to get to. So in a perfect world, we would take the next step and have a public meeting where we have issues of significant non-compliance and try and identify what the barriers are and provide solutions to those. So our comms team is helping us with collateral. So for some of those different types of properties where people may not have traditionally undertaken controls, to kind of target our education to different types of landowners so they know how to go about it. Ultimately, while we want to be able to facilitate as much as possible, a desirable outcome would be that we've got the information available for people to kind of get on and sort it out themselves, and our role becomes less important. We're quite a way away from that, but really we want to empower and enable the community to have those own solutions. But like anything, you need somebody to facilitate that.
Thank you, Andrea.
And could I just follow up just quickly on that? So from the governance point of view, are you confident that within the long-term plan you've got the resources put into the long-term plan that we are about to approve? Or not? I didn't say approve, I said we're about to consultate on.
Through the chair, the highest figure is the preferred figure for my mind. It's not the preferred option in the consultation document, but it's a way of staging to get to the point of having the resources to deliver what we need to do under our legislative requirements and what our community expects of us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question, Chairman. A good question. Thank you. We're on rabbits, but I've got Gary. Are you on rabbits, Gary? Right. Fine.
No, look, I don't want to labour the point on table 2, but I do want to agree with Councillor Laws just around what the table's presenting. It actually has some incredibly good news in there, I think, but to me it is very apparent. It's the lack of resource around what's being presented here. So I believe it should not be used as an example of how rabbits are currently sitting out in the region. If you look at Wanaka, 5 properties, Wanaka hasn't really been inspected. The Wakatit Basin doesn't feature here at all. Alexandra, 4 properties, so Alexandra region hasn't really been inspected at all. But if you look at 13 properties on the East Ida Valley, then you've probably encompassed a fair number of properties in that region. So some areas have been hit very hard around the inspections, and then you look at 85% compliance. Those farmers are doing a very, very good job. So, I think as we get more resource on the ground, then the data and detail that will flow through to us in these sorts of tables should be far more representative of the issues. But it looks as though the limited resource out there has just targeted certain areas.
Great, thank you. We're on rabbits, Gretchen.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, overall, it's fantastic to have this information. Thank you for providing that and showing what the council actually is doing in implementation. But on the rabbits and the quality of programs or not, I suppose our job today isn't to so much look in the detail of how should it be one person, should it be two people, where are they doing it, but to be assured that there is a program in place and that the program, I think as Councillor Malcolm said, has some sort of rationale behind it towards what we're doing. This is a quarterly inspection. I understand people are frustrated. Yes, there's a rabbit infestation in areas that people have mentioned, but I guess the question is, based on the pest strategy and the implementation plan that goes with that, have we got a compliance program in place that's got some rationale behind it and has sufficient resourcing to fulfil this year's needs? Next in the LTP, we have a chance to relook at that, but are we doing what we said we would do at the moment?
Through the chair, so we have a compliance program in place. The table reflects a mixture of the compliance program and reaction to complaints, which is why in some of those areas there are small numbers. We have to balance the resources that we have. Is our compliance program comprehensive? No. It matches, it's comprehensive for the resources that we have available. So we had to be pragmatic.
So it's based on complaints.
Through the chair, no. Some of them are based on following up on complaints. That's where the small numbers are. So the larger numbers are based on our work program.
Okay, sounds good. My sense is we've done rabbits pretty well. Unless anybody's got a burning desire or a question.
I have one more burning question.
Okay, well, we'll quickly move through them, Gary.
Yep, my one question is just around, I think it's clause 88, and we are stating that other recommendations for science-based interventions, biological and non-biological, that may assist the region and its communities to reduce rabbit numbers. So can you just confirm that we are actually now considering other alternative biological controls?
Through the chair, so I met with Manaki Whenua last week, and we have a scope of work that we are seeking their input into that covers evaluation and monitoring, science interventions that we are not currently using that may be possible in the future, and it also covers some expert input into other compliance tools that we might be able to use depending on the size of property. So that's quite broad and encompassing a lot of issues that will help. I hope we can only do what the science and the genetics and all of that does, but we are very open-minded in terms of getting advice about how we can do better.
Okay, thank you. Happy, Gary. I'm going to move on from rabbits, and this is burning. And I'm going to go back to, I know Hilary might have an outstanding question, but Michael Decker has been sitting there patiently and Marion beside or near. So Michael Decker.
Yeah, I may be patient, but I got overexcited with my questions about Tomahawk Lagoon, which is Andrea's next paper.
Yes. I'm pleased we waited. Marion.
I've got two questions. One's Wilding Pines, and one's Lake Hayes.
Yeah.
The first one is paragraph 57 and 58 about Wilding Pines. We received money from government, I presume, 5.9 million. 5.2 got distributed in Wakatipu Management Unit. And then it says the funding agreement commenced in late 2020. And so far, those many hectares, 21,000 hectares have been controlled in the Wakatipu Management Units and 13,000 in Central Otago. Here's my problem. It's the next sentence. There is still a large amount of funding to be spent, approximately 3 million. It's a hell of a lot. And can I say, if that's government money and central government's looking at that and saying, excuse me, we've got priorities, this is unspent. While COVID-19 facilitated additional funding, is also proven to be a barrier to participation in the program, which requires a landholder contribution. So what's the problem? Is it the lack of landholder contribution?
Through the chair.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking that question, because I've got an update as of yesterday. So obviously this is an undesirable issue that we're faced with having money and the potential to not be able to spend that to achieve the outcomes. My team have been working very hard liaising. So we are a recipient at the moment in the delivery model. So we have ultimate accountability, but limited oversight of day-to-day operations. So we've been working hard with the Department of Conservation and the Ministry of Primary Industries and trusts to come up with a plan to try and mitigate some of these barriers. So we are much more confident as of this morning that money will be able to be spent through a mixture of addressing the landowner contribution barrier, potentially accelerating some work that ORC will, which I've alluded to in the paper, which ORC will have an active role in this responsibility for the service delivery. Yep. We're working with the Ministry of Social Development. The terrain is quite difficult, so in terms of retaining staff, but Ministry of Social Development, we had a meeting with them last week and they're going to help us with recruitment. So there are a number of things that have happened since I have written this paper that I think put us in a much more favourable position.
Sorry, darling, can you just explain about the landholder contribution? I don't understand that.
Yep. So through the chair, currently the national program requires 20% contribution from landowners. However, I'm led to believe that there are exceptions to that, so we're working on becoming an exception if we can.
Okay, thank you. Hilary, did you have an outstanding?
No, sweetheart, I have number 2 question.
Okay.
Sorry, which is to do with Lake Hayes.
Sorry, I apologise.
Could we, are we following the staying on a topic?
Yes, we definitely are.
Yes, because I've got the question.
Sorry, Wilding Pines. Sorry, Hilary.
I was wanting plant pests in general.
No, that's Wilding Pines. Alexa, we'll come back to you.
No, I'm on something else.
Okay, Hilary.
I'm just trying to get topics right.
The compliance and non-compliance, I was wondering, 2,707 inspections for Old Man's Beard. Have we got one person dedicated to Old Man's Beard?
Through the chair, not necessarily dedicated to Old Man's Beard, but working in an area in which Old Man's Beard is more prevalent. So we have at least 3 staff that are undertaking inspections, probably 4 around Old Man's Beard in the region.
It seems to be, as somebody who has a property that has from time to time rabbits on, and having a property which does get inspected and from time to time with Old Man's Beard, that balance doesn't seem it's a huge amount of inspections for one thing that, it's obviously a significant thing, Old Man's Beard, but it's a lot of resources we're putting into it.
Through the chair, so they are individual occurrences of a pest plant. So the number of properties is 2,400. So we are working on ensuring that our priorities are spread out over our entire pest plan. However, the other factor is that these properties are often urban, smaller properties, so it's much easier to get through a larger number of properties than it is to do one rabbit inspection you could get through.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Hilary. I put Michael Laws on the list, but what topic was it, Michael?
I have a general question, and then I have a question on what.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Marion Lake Hayes.
Thank you, dear. It's paragraph 20, or 19 and 20. Staff are liaising with Waka Kotahi Transport Agency regarding the site occupation approval process if we did the culvert. Is there an update on this? Because I get mixed messages. I get messages that Waka Kotahi has said, yes, go ahead, it's all over, which changes a whole lot of dates and times. Thank you, dear.
Yes, through Mr. Chairman. They are very supportive of it as the owner of a state highway. So I met with them last week, I think it was, to talk through the detail, because I'm operating on the basis that this thing will proceed. So I'm doing the enabling kind of stuff now. Yeah. So I just wanted to understand the mechanics of how it works with an asset constructed by ORC sitting in a state highway. From their perspective, that's pretty routine. The way it normally works is the asset is handed over to them to become the owner upon construction completion, but the person that implements it, in this case ORC, would continue to maintain it. In this case, keep it free of debris and that kind of thing. There's obviously an approval process to work through. We haven't sought formal approval yet, and we'll work through that in due course once Council's made its decision on the long-term plan.
In due course translates to?
Well, the key decision point is adopting long-term plan in June. Yeah. At the moment, we've got the culvert in the estimates and provision for immediate get on with in the financial year. So that's really the decision point, which gives it the green light to proceed through all that consenting, approval, whatever. Yep.
Okay, no, great. I'm sort of hoping we're seeing the end of this particular report very shortly, but I've got Alexa and Michael Laws.
Mine's Lake Hayes.
Okay, great.
I've got a question on something else
and Gary.
Too. But Lake Hayes, Gavin, say you're in the enabling phase of this, and it's about our long-term plan. I understand that funding's in the second year of the long-term plan. Is that right?
No, what we've done with the Lake Hayes works is provided for funding in years 1 and 2. Awesome. It's a total amount of 1.1 million. The finer detail about the cash flow and the detail of the work, we would have to work that through, but it certainly involves starting on day 1 of the financial year.
Okay, the next thing is, how does they've raised $1 million for that culvert from private funding. How do we spend that? How does that work? How does the relationship between the private funding and our long-term plan work?
Mr. Donnelly might want to comment on the mechanics of that, but there's a way to go in terms of, I guess, securing and understanding that. From our perspective, we don't know what the preconditions would be and what happens if you implement the work and then find you don't get consent, all that kind of implementation side, all that has to be discussed and worked through. Right. But Mr. Donnelly might want to comment on the mechanics of how an LTP would handle a grant.
So I might try questioning that in a different way later. Through an email, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexa. My understanding was it was less than $1 million. Was it $1 million?
600,000.
Gary, are we on Lake Hayes?
It's $1 million.
No, we're not on Lake Hayes.
Okay, so we're going to go Michael Laws and Gary, and then hopefully we've wrapped up this particular report. Wallabies, okay.
Yes, so do I.
Okay, let's talk Wallabies.
Well, just a general question. In answering a previous question, you talked about facilitation, and you said, I understood you to say, and that's what I'm asking the question about, that we didn't really play a role in that. I want to probe that, because if we've got a pest management plan, that I have an expectation that the ORC will be a facilitator. And I just want to clarify where we are on that, please.
Certainly through the chair. So yes, we 100% have a facilitation role. My point was that it's a core part of every individual's role. The world has changed in terms of, as it will always do, in terms of priority, areas of priority and importance in the life cycle of our regional plan. My point was that we're looking to get a dedicated resource who would have facilitation strategies and implementation as a core part of their role, as opposed to in addition to the inspection type work. I mean, we have people with technical skills, we have people with facilitation skills. We just need to get that balance right for our work program. So yes, 100% we have a facilitation role.
Okay, but do we have a plan? Because that's what I'm hearing you say we don't have at the moment.
Through the chair, we have a plan. It's outlined here in terms of the 8 communities that we're going to work with immediately, and obviously as resources allow, we wish to facilitate as many on the ground responses as possible across the broad range of areas that my team is responsible for.
Okay. Can I ask the Wallaby question now?
Yes, you can. You can do that, and then we'll, and then Kevin, and then Gary.
I've looked at the Wallabies thing, and am I to understand that the ORCs now is under ECAN when it comes to, I mean, there's meant to be an interregional approach, but who's driving this?
Through the chair, so we're driving our response. We work collaboratively with ECAN on many matters, but we have our own drivers, our own funding and our own work program.
Right, so are we shooting any wallabies at the moment? Because we're catching them on those things, but are we actually killing any?
So as you'll see on some page of the report, there were in February 4 wallabies reported to us. 2 were on the ECAN side, 2 were on the Otago side, 1 was on the side of the road, no longer with us. The other was unconfirmed. So we are in the position that we don't have large-scale wallaby populations, but on the in the report it refers to the Livingston forestry area where we've got a photo of 2 of them, and we're actively undertaking control work right now.
Right. So
I actually thought we did have significant wallaby populations in North Otago.
I thought too.
Well, we've got no idea, one or the other.
Well, and we won't have if. Sorry,
am I wrong in that, Andrea?
So through the chair, our issues are around eradication. So they're completely different to the Canterbury issues, which is a very fortunate position to be in.
Yeah.
But
have we got significant wallaby population in North Otago or not?
Based on my understanding, no, not significant. So we have small numbers of and pockets of wallabies. We have staff that are undertaking surveillance and control. We're about to spend a reasonable amount of government funding increasing our surveillance and control efforts. So it's largely the government funding that we've just received is actually about better understanding the problem.
It's because at the moment we're sort of reactive, aren't we? So we've got a couple of cameras.
Yep.
There we go. If you don't pass that camera, we don't have a problem. Second, we're reliant upon other people saying, spotted one, ring here, or we found one by the side of the road. There's nothing proactive about that strategy. It's an inherent reactive strategy. And it's also a luck-based strategy to a large extent too, isn't it? You've got to be fortunate to be able to spot these little things. Very elusive creatures, tend to hide in bush, very difficult to find. But we've got the technology to find them. Are we just not employing it?
Through the chair, so we have to work within a budget that's set. We are, as you've alluded to, they are not just going to walk out in front of us in the daytime. So that's a costly exercise. Do we have a proactive program that matches the resources we have in place? Yes. We're about to triple our impact as of the next week, given the government funding that's been increased that allows us to have much greater presence on the ground. It is searching for a needle in a haystack in some cases. It doesn't mean it's not important, but it is resource hungry. So with unlimited budget, yes, we can employ, and as the report alludes to, we've got a couple of different options that we are going to implement in terms of using thermal imaging to make our job a bit easier.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to Kevin, my understanding is that we're actually in an exciting period in that we're about to establish a regional coordination group for the surveillance and control of wallabies. So I would have thought that was quite significant.
Through the chair, I think we've got a number of very exciting initiatives and backed by both internal and external funding immediately upon us. So yes, it's a great.
Thank you, Kevin.
And that was the comment I was going to make too. But also on. Yeah, no, I'll just leave it because that's exactly the comment I was about to make. So there's a lot of stuff that is about to happen.
Well, who's on the regional coordination group?
Through the chair, we're just working through the terms of reference and membership. It's my understanding that that will be discussed with the right people in the next week or so.
That's great. One of the things that, just generally there's a few different groups being set up, I don't really see a councillor interface in some of them. I mean, thank you, I'm in a fortunate position. I've been appointed on the Catchment Group entity, and that's amazing. And maybe there's other opportunities. I just leave that there. Gary?
Yep, thank you. Couple of quick things. Just with all the discussion of Wilding Pines, part of the problem now is that through the work programs that the trusts are doing, they are getting to the people who have flatly refused to do their Wilding Pines, and they still flatly refuse to do them. So they are the ones who are on the other side of the spectrum, where the willing ones are done, the unwilling ones are saying, not on my dead body type situation. So and the trusts are really scratching their heads as to, well, is there a regulatory tool
We have their names.
to use that? My question was around clauses 38 through to 40, just on we are going down a path of, we're calling it a non-regulatory land management approach. And we're getting into some quite detailed stuff when you look at the list of wintering well, nutrient management, soil health, paddock cultivation, land drainage, irrigation, good management practice. It looks like we are heading down the path of farm consulting. And my question is really around, if we're going down that path, where are we getting our advice and expertise that's going to populate all of this detail that's going to be sitting on the website? And then what are we going to do with it? Am I going to be ploughing my road paddock and have an ORC truck scream to a halt and someone leap over the fence with the good management practice folder and say, you're doing it wrong? And I'm going to say, no, I'm not doing it wrong. And, is this going to lead into what could populate our plans in the future or not?
So, through the chair, there's a number of questions there. I just want
It's education, isn't it?
Correct.
We're a liaison function.
Yeah, if I could just go back to your Wilding conifer question, is that allowed? Was that a question around compliance tools, or?
Yeah, you could do. Yeah, the fact that it's getting hard.
That would be appreciated, actually.
Yeah.
Yep. So there are two categories of, I guess, people who are less motivated. So one is one, we have a role where we have no compliance tool. So the rule in our regional pest management plan can be enforced only when a landholder has previously been a recipient of government funding from 2016 onwards. So that does limit the number of properties where compliance can be undertaken. Do we have a role in terms of our everyday business of encouraging people and educating people in terms of why it's important to control wilding conifers? Absolutely. But we don't have a compliance tool to force people to get on board unless they've been a recipient of previous government funding. We've been working a lot with Waiwanaka with their $3 million. That's only on a small part of Otago, well, a significant part, but just with in a specific geographic area to proactively remove wilding conifers, and that's as a result of that government funding. So hopefully that answers your first question.
Yeah.
The second one around a new approach for non-regulatory support. So one of the key principles is that we're not duplicating the effort elsewhere. So I am new to this, I guess, world, and I'm really trying to figure out how we add value versus all of the other players in the market. So what we're planning on doing is bringing back to a committee a proposed approach for some feedback. But again, one of those principles is that we have to identify what our unique proposition is in terms of providing that. So again, it's around, as Councillor Scott alluded to, education. We want to have some core information on our website that people can go to, but also we want to use the data and the information available to us on the ground to help focus our effort in terms of where we want to partner either with individual landowners. So I can imagine that the expanded rural team, if that is approved in the long-term plan, has a a geographic area to work in. They understand the context, they understand which landowners they may need to work with one-on-one, but also working with groups of landowners to kind of spread our benefit. And again, we have to be very mindful about what other people are doing so that we can play that connection role, but we don't actually have to be the doer in all of the actions that we undertake. So it's about just finding out how we fit in there.
Right. I think that whole rural liaison, you make the reference, it's still a bit of a work in progress. Okay, we're happy, Gary? Well, not necessarily happy, but you
I think if there's a paper coming, then we'll get the chance to flesh it out then, so that's probably the better opportunity.
Thank you. I think we're done. We've got 2 recommendations, one to receive the report, one to note. We've got to move it. Do we have a seconder, Kevin? Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion, those for.
Just one bit of discussion, so thank you for an excellent report and for your answering of questions today. Thought you could.
How's that? That's great. Okay, those for? Aye. Against? Carried. Right, excellent. Let's move on to the final report, Tomahawk.
It's all yours, Michael.
And I welcome Libby to the front desk. I had the opportunity to meet with Libby and Gavin, and Paul Pope from the Tomahawk community was invited as well. Unfortunately, he was unable to actually make it. Anyway, so this report is before I go to Councillor Decker, this report's on the Tomahawk Lagoon Enhancement Project update. Engagement with the local community around the Tomahawk Lagoon was initiated as water quality was found to be degrading. This report provides an update on the proposed activities for the Tomahawk Lagoon catchment over the coming years, and there's a draft outline management plan that's been prepared by staff and is attached. The report itself also highlights the issues, it highlights potential projects, which I really think is great, positive outcomes focused projects, and also identifies straightforward projects that can be delivered quickly at a low cost. Now, there was some movement of emails on the Sunday where staff have come back and tweaked their proposed recommendations. And Liz has got a copy of, are they behind me, Liz?
No,
Yes, please. And the recommendation 2 is that approves the draft outline management plan as the base of further community consultation, the prioritisation of projects in 21-22, that's next year, but managed within existing budgets, and notes that the implementation of projects would proceed in 22-23, subject to long-term plan decisions. So I think what staff, and I agree with it, are saying is the LTP doesn't change, but there'll be some spillover work from this year, and there'll be some work potentially going on next year that doesn't actually cost. And ideally, a lot of it will be community driven, but the implementation doesn't happen until 22-23. Anyway, staff, any comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just further to that, the key change in the recommendations is that we advance preparing the management plan, doing it now and into next financial year. And the reason for that is it ensures that we enter year 2 of the long-term plan with a very clear set of prioritised projects, fully costed, which would then be delivered, subject to LTP decisions in years 2, 3 and 4. That's the key change from the recommendations in the paper.
Thank you, Gavin. Marvellous. Okay, I've got Michael, who's been waiting diligently for the last half an hour in the last meeting.
I'm going to be a huge disappointment to you.
Sorry?
I'm going to be a huge disappointment to you because the comment I wanted to make was a slightly niggly one, really.
Oh, well, we'll move to Kate, shall we?
I want to preface it by saying I fully support the paper.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that Libby's put this in front of us, and it is good to see the council proposing to make a commitment to the Tomahawk work. My niggle is that we have already invested well over $60,000 into the work that's referenced here.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the citizen science, I'm thinking of the Smales Tomahawk Restoration Group and their native plantings. I'm thinking of all those school kids under Eco Otago who have been up to their thighs in that lagoon for years now, measuring water quality, and drawing conclusions from it and reporting back to the community.
Yes.
It's not as though, I mean, an outsider reading this paper would think, that's a nice new idea. I'm saying it ain't. It's a nice idea which we've been working on for some time. And the 60,000 plus has come out of the Eco Fund to those excellent groups who've been working in the Tomahawk using our money for a long time. That's the only point I wanted to make. And the paper doesn't refer to that, and I hope it might.
Well, if you look at page 12, citizen science, paragraph 12, citizen science water quality monitoring is undertaken by Eco-Otago monthly. Their results indicate that turbidity, choline, nitrates and phosphate levels are all
exactly that, but that wasn't my point, Mr. Chairman. The point was that we have actually allowed that to happen ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. That's amazing. And it's a long process. If you look at the water, it's still degraded.
I agree.
And it's still going to be degraded for a period of time because we're not, from an LTP perspective, we're not doing anything until 22-23 of substance implementation. But this is the necessary preparatory work.
Well, are we debating a question, eh?
We're doing questions, and I'm just replying to, and I'll come to you, Kate.
Sorry.
I've got Kate, and I saw another hand here. Kevin, was it you, Kevin?
And Gary, yeah.
And Alexa. Sorry, I keep missing. He just put his hand up high enough.
I see English.
That's why I'm telling you it's very hard.
Can't keep it up there for that one.
Okay, Kate.
So I have absolutely no problems. It's a great report. Thank you very much. I've got no problems with investing in Tomahawk. It's something we all know needs doing. It's how this has been reprioritised. And what has happened is I understood that we're doing OKs first. We were then going to come back with a priority list. Tomahawk was going to be somewhere in there. But by doing this rejig with this motion, aren't we giving it a priority that we hadn't otherwise confirmed, and that we had said we were actually going to go out to the community through the long-term plan and set new priorities through a mechanism?
Yeah. Can I pass it over to Sarah to have a comment on that?
Well, I think the staff can also adequately answer it, but I guess in my view, we've had various discussions through the LTP about work that is sort of ready for investment, as opposed to work that needs to go through more of a prioritisation process. And what we've tried to do is balance the desire of some councillors for more boots on the ground and implementation with the desire also to be doing some of this in a more strategic way. So the prioritisation work that will come back to you at some point, looking at where are the watercourses where we think we need to invest and make a more enduring plan.
Yes.
Will come back to you. This is the gap filler, if you like, where we have investment ready sites that have already had some investment, and we can easily pick up and do something meaningful in the interim.
That's a marvellous answer.
No, and that's fine. And then the subsequent question is, do I take it from that response and us going in with this money to a new priority that you do not anticipate coming back to us anytime in the first year of the long-term plan for more money for any project? Because usually that would be any underspend, if there were to be any, would be looked at probably more broadly than just for more water issues. I mean, that's the problem. We've got a conundrum coming ahead with the costs of the next long-term plan, and we're now allocating any underspend out.
I'm not sure I'm understanding you.
Well, sorry, an underspend usually, if we were to have an underspend in the 21-22 year, and that's predicated that they're subject to us having that.
Yes.
If we had an overspend in any other part of council, wouldn't we first prioritise that work that's already in there? I mean, that's already in the existing plan if we had an overspend.
Yeah. So can I just jump in there, Kate, and say, it says our director has said, is we've actually already got a draft outline plan, and we're endeavouring, instead of it sitting in a corner in a cupboard, we're trying to put it into the community at next to no budgetary cost.
Well, it is a budgetary cost. We're just finding the money from saving somewhere else, and that's fine. But it's not.
No, it's coming out of their budget for this year.
No, next year's, isn't it?
This year. Gavin?
Yes, the activity will commence now. What we're really saying is
It's 21, 22.
the level of activity, level of resource required to.
Sorry, please, we'll let Gavin talk. Yeah.
The level of resource required to take the outline management plan, work with the community, turn it into a prioritised set of costed projects is not huge.
Yeah.
Right. In the overall scheme of things. And that's why we're saying, we can absorb it in existing budgets and whatever. In a first draft of the draft long-term plan that you received in workshops, we actually had action on the ground in Tomahawk starting on the 1st of July this year. In other words, commencing $100,000, then $80,000 and $80,000. As a consequence of the instruction to reprioritise and think about the must-do versus things that could be lagged, we've pushed out starting Tomahawk on the ground into year 2 of the LTP. Now, we recognise that's a bit of a problem because we've been working with the community for a wee while now, and they're really expecting us to do something. So that's why we want to maintain some momentum, work with them around the prioritisation, at the same time, do some relatively cheap but effective quick wins, which are identified in the project. So what we're trying to do here is balance actually delivering something quickly, taking the time to get the prioritisation right, and the overall organisation's finances. And that's what this does.
Right.
We could, of course, bring it forward if you wanted to, could start those things in year 1, but the signal you've given us is defer it to year 2.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Gavin. Kevin?
I just wanted to move all 4 motions, recommendations.
Yeah, the amended ones there.
Yeah, as above on the screen.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. We've got Gary.
Yeah, my question was along those lines that Kate has started, but it was really around, we got 100 for this next financial year and then 80 and 80. And
no.
Pushed out to
we have $100,000 in year 2 of the long-term plan, which is the 2022-2023 year.
And then the years following that, another 80 and then another 80.
Correct.
Yeah. And for the list that we've identified of works, of actions, we're confident that that will meet those actions.
I can't be certain because at this stage we've got a very high level list of things that you could do. We're making some assessment around what the priority things in that list might cost. It's a very high ballpark, but that's why it's also important to work through the filling out the detail of the management plan, because it enables us to then enter that year 2 of the long-term plan with better estimates. It might mean a change to the annual plan for that year. We might need to increase that. It's only a provision at the minute.
We must be sitting around about close to where it's not going to be half or more or exponentially out from what we're indicating there.
Well, I couldn't rule it out. I mean, what I'm saying is the best estimate at the moment based on some very coarse information. And as we work through a detailed management plan that allows us to refine what we actually mean by those activities, cost them out properly and prioritise them, and then see how that fits with the provision that would be made in the long-term plan.
Thank you, Alexa.
So I think you've actually answered my main question, which is the reason that it's pushed out in our LTP to year 2 and 3 is because we don't have the budget for year 1. Is that correct?
Well, it really came as a consequence of looking at the organisation's activity as a whole in year 1 and just looking at the organisation as a whole, saying what are the kinds of activities that you don't have to do because we're not legislated or whatever, what could you move out? And as a consequence of that, the executive decided that this is one of those things that can be moved from year 1 into year 2.
So you gave us some boundaries to work within,
right?
And as a consequence of working within those boundaries, we had to
push that out.
That's right.
My last question on that point is, did we make a decision around prioritisation, or is that something we just discussed? Because my understanding was we discussed that reprioritisation of waterways, but that we had 3 waterways that were ready to go, and they were Lake Hayes, Tomahawk Lagoon, and Lake Tuakito. And so did we make a decision to not to reprioritise, or was
you gave us some areas within which you wanted us to prioritise in terms of function or category. So water, biosecurity, transport and air. So within that, we prioritised. And as I said before, there are two things happening in tandem here. One is we've got those 3 projects that have had work done on them already that are investment ready. And so they were the 3 that were always the ones that were proposed for early in this LTP. And then in addition to that, you've got the prioritisation piece, which is being worked on now, which will prioritise all of the waterways in Otago and where we're going to put effort.
Great.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, no, and that's really helpful. Okay, sorry, Gretchen, and then we might move
I
to
think that probably answers it. I just wanted to say that it makes absolute sense to me that we go with the projects which are easy to implement, ready to go right now. Fantastic, that's really good. Great. And the other bit is, supporting what Sarah just said, which is that whilst Tomahawk has been on our agenda for a long time, we have got an entire region of waterways, and we need to look at not only our legislative responsibilities, but what our community's desires are for all of those waterways, where we can make the most efficient and effective investments to get real gains quickly. They need to be based on working with communities who are ready to work with us as well. Tomahawk could well come out as a high priority, don't know that, but when you look at spending all your money in one area perhaps, potentially, and losing opportunities to spend that money. We've got limited amounts of money all of us can pay as ratepayers. Where would we best spend that on waterways? We don't want to limit our options straight away. We want to ensure that that's really strategically planned and then also consulted through the LTP. So really good process, I think, and brilliant that we can get underway on Tomahawk as well and
that's
supporting.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you, Gretchen. No, we're going to move from Kevin. And we had a second over here, Carmen.
Happy, yeah.
If there's no further discussion, anybody, I'll put the motion. Those for? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. To close the meeting of the Implementation Committee.